News.
All right, well, let's see what key crossbench Senator David Leyonhjelm thinks about the TPP amongst other issues. He joins me here live in the studio. Thanks for your company.
Thank you.
Is it dead now? I mean, the government seems to be saying they can find a way to restructure it. I spoke to Craig Emerson as a former Trade Minister a little earlier this afternoon, and he said, look, you can't restructure something which is entirely structured around the US. You have to look at something new.
The US was very influential in getting the TPP into the shape that it currently is or was. And so, for example, a lot of the IP stuff, the IP provisions in it, were a reflection of their concerns. I think they were the only weak spot in the treaty, to be frank. But multilateral treaties are better than bilateral treaties.
Why is that?
Well, free trade is good for everybody. It's good for poor people, it's good for rich people, it's good for the unemployed to get a job, it's good for prosperity. There's not a decent economist in the world that would say free trade is not good. Why would you not want to sell your stuff that you produce to other people, and why would they not want to sell their stuff to you? Free trade is
that
good.
Pure free trade, or is that what we sort of see as often called free trade? And that's where maybe this is where you're coming from. Multilateral agreements are more pure generally than bilateral agreements.
Yes, they are. Yes, well, for example, our free trade agreement with America excluded sugar, and the sugar industry, screamed their heads off about it, justifiably so. America's quite protectionist in areas. We're quite protectionist too in some areas, although we tend to use biosecurity as our sort of protectionist barrier. So we'll say, well, yeah, you can let your stuff in here, but only if it passes our quarantine requirements. And then we set quarantine requirements so high that they can't bring them in. Bananas are a very good example of that, off-season bananas.
What's going on with sugar, by the way? You just mentioned that before. It wasn't only well, it was every free trade deal that Andrew Robb struck that his own side of politics in particular was hailing a success. The sugar sector seemed to be left out in the cold each and every time. Is that because the other nations just wouldn't allow it to be in?
Yeah, it's a very distorted market globally, like dairy. Dairy is also very distorted globally. It's very hard to get a genuine free trade in both those two because the producers in the countries that are dealing with Australia are very vocal, and they lobby their governments, and though their governments say, oh well, it doesn't matter if our consumers pay higher prices for dairy products or higher prices for sugar, we're going to keep these guys happy. We do it too. Our sugar industry is rather mollycoddled, I have to say. They're protected. So we're not allowed to bring in ethanol, for example, from Brazil, even though it would be cheaper than what we produce in Australia.
Bob Catter would go berserk if ethanol from Brazil was brought in.
Well, there's about 5 seats up the coast of Queensland that are very influenced by the sugar vote, shall we say.
I'm imagining George Christensen, who's already out there on a lot of issues, would be well and truly out there triple-fold if this happened.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Well, help me with this, because, so many sections of the Liberal Party and even some sections of the National Party, but more so the Liberals, they tend to talk the talk on free trade, but then populism masquerading, or protectionism masquerading as populism, often permeates far more than free trade when it comes to the actuality of what gets done.
Yes.
How do these two things come together? I mean, it's almost like, we don't want to get too into the history here, but the right of politics was back at Federation, the protectionists versus the free traders. That was the divide. Labor came along, and suddenly protectionists and free traders decided that Labor was the more scary prospect. We've got to find a way to work together. Now it doesn't work, putting those two together.
So it's a sort of a conflict between politics and principle. The principle is clear. Free trade is good. No doubt about that. It's not even vaguely arguable. But the politics get in the way. So the question is...
You mean case by case? Sort of like the sugar sector or dairy sector or whatever it might be.
Who is more important, consumers or producers? Are consumers going to vote because sugar prices go up by 10%? Now, the chances are no, that's not going to influence their vote. Whereas sugar producers, they will change their vote.
Because their livelihood is impacted.
Yeah, that's right, their livelihood. They see themselves as being disadvantaged by cheap competitors, and they see a way in which they can stop those cheap competitors coming over and taking their business.
You don't listen to them on that, though, because you take an ideological view on this. So what do you say to them? I mean, if you're meeting with these sort of people and they're saying to you, hey, you advocate something philosophically, free trade, but it destroys our sectors on this reason or that reason, what's your answer back to them? Bad luck because it's for the greater good?
Well, yeah, it's not really bad luck. I mean, it's a bit like our car sector. You know, we couldn't produce cars at a competitive price. We ended up with car consumers paying much higher prices than were necessary, than we will now pay as a result of the car sector stopping local manufacturing and the protection being wound back. So, so the question then is always, well, who's going to benefit the most from winding back protection? And of course, the argument is, and you hear this from the likes of Nick Xenophon and others, is those car workers aren't going to get another job. Well, that's not true.
Well, there are ways to try to provide them opportunities to get another job.
That's right. And if you really are into helping people and using other people's money, you can help train them into other jobs, or you can advise them, you can direct them towards other jobs. You know, what happened to all the farriers when horses went out of favour and we started using cars? Obviously they had to go and find other jobs.
So this is just the march of history would be your argument as far as that goes?
Well, it is, yes. We shouldn't stand in the way of better solutions that are more cost effective. We should just allow these things to occur, because ultimately the prosperity of all of us is increased.
What do you say to Pauline Hanson, who says it's about fair trade, not free trade?
I've got a book that says what's fair, and as long as it's in my book and not her book, I'm all in favour of that. But I suspect she might have different ideas about what's fair. So it comes down to whose definition of fair. My idea of fair is the best quality for the cheapest price. Now, if that's what she's talking about, I don't care who makes it.
Well, I don't think that's what she means. I mean, she wouldn't mean the best quality for the cheapest price. She would mean something that protects Australian jobs. That would be the argument.
Yeah, and even if the quality is poorer and the price is higher. Well, I say no, because the people who are buying that are Australian consumers. Why should they pay for lower quality or higher prices?
Some people might be willing to, though, Senator. People that, you know, the things like the Buy Australia campaign that's been around forever and a day. I mean, there is that national attitude, although I have to say, when you have two items on the shelf and one is Buy Australia and the other is cheaper, a lot of people just go for the cheap one.
They do indeed. There are some people, I think it's a lot less than the noise you hear about it, but there are some people who are happy to pay more for something that's made in Australia. But, you know, let them do it. I don't mind that. That's fine. That's free choice. You know, I don't want to prevent them from exercising their choice. But I'll give you one example. Everyone's cheering now that Vegemite is back in Australian ownership. I bet you anything, Vegemite sales do not change. I bet you nobody buys any more Vegemite now.
Full rhetoric.
Yeah, it's just noise.
Well, okay, again, help me with that one, because there's a certain quotient of the ideological spectrum that finds symbolism deplorable. They don't like symbolism in politics. Yet that is pure symbolism, and it's one that's driven by nationalism, which tends to be the same side of politics that doesn't like symbolism.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know, it's a feel-good feeling. You know, I think I like Vegemite. I don't care who makes it, as long as it tastes the right. It tastes the same as it always tasted, and it's not a silly price.
See, I'd prefer it being Australian ownership, but at the end of the day, I don't care, if I put it that way. If there's two reasons, if there's two like-for-like options and one's Australian owned, great, I'll take it. But I'm not going to make decisions beyond that in that way.
Well, yes, except that you think, OK, now, are all Australians better than all foreigners in terms of owning something like that? And the same can be applied to national assets, you know, ports and things like that. Is it better, for example, to have an environmentalist socialist owning Vegemite than a capitalist foreigner? You know, that's an interesting question. You know, why is it that all Australians are inherently better as owners of assets than all foreigners?
And the short answer is they're not necessarily. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about this worldwide movement towards populism. Now, yeah, at one level, it's not hard to see why populism works in politics, because you've got to be popular to try to get re-elected depending on the electoral system. You're not a populist, even though some populist principles you'll agree with, others you'll disagree with. Where is this going?
Well, you have to look at a couple of things that are driving it. First of all, there's a strong anti-establishment, you know, I hate you all anger thing out there. It is a factor, and it's a bit undirected. We saw it a bit in the 2013 election with the election of Clive Palmer's group. There was a sort of a protest vote in the Senate. It then landed on Pauline Hanson One Nation in this election this year. It's not necessarily very sticky. It's floating around. The other factor it's generally a rejection of the status quo and the
major parties,
in particular. But there's also an anti-immigration, anti-foreign investment sentiment floating about. The foreign investment thing, I think, has been around a long time, and I don't think it's any greater than it ever was. Most Australians are relatively relaxed about it, except you know, they get a bit touchy about individual issues, but in the broad, immigration is a worldwide thing. I mean, it's driven by Mexicans and others from Central America and South America in the US. It's driven by the people coming from the Middle East in Europe. We have our own issues here with immigration. What I find frustrating about it is there are some legitimate concerns in that immigration issue. We don't want to lose our values. You know, our liberal democracy is very precious. It's very, very important. We don't.
See, I don't think people are nearly as culturally in tune with the importance of preserving liberal democracy as they once were. We've become much more sort of attuned to moments of populism or capitalism.
Yeah.
Liberal democracy is not what it once was.
No, but when you start talking about free speech, freedom of association, equality before the law, freedom of association, those sort of things, we tend to take them a bit for granted. But when you realise that some of the people coming to our country and also going to Europe, I don't think it's such an issue in the US from that point of view, although they're debating it quite a lot. They don't believe in those issues. They've never had any tradition of them. There's a tendency by some of those people to expect to change Australia to suit what they think their values are. We have to be very mindful about that and on our guard. Where I'm critical of the anti-Islam, anti-Muslim immigration movement is, I suppose, it's easy to identify a problem, and certainly some, not all, but the Bosnian Muslims, for example, are not an issue at all. But you get some from the Middle East. They don't support our liberal democratic values.
It's more cultural than religious, you would argue.
Yes, I agree. But there's no solutions by those people other than stop Muslim immigration, which is not really a solution at all, because the vast majority of them do want to assimilate. My feeling is, let's raise the bar on citizenship. Let's let them into the country. Live here, not be too picky about who comes here. Obviously, we want to keep out criminals and terrorists and things like that, but let's not be too picky about it. But if they don't adopt our liberal democratic values, then they don't become a citizen. This is not a unique idea. Switzerland does that. You've got to live there for 10 years and be adopted and recommended by a canton before you can become a Swiss citizen. A lot of people don't even make it. If you don't support Swiss values, they're not going to adopt you, and you don't become a Swiss citizen. There's no reason why we couldn't substantially raise the bar on citizenship and thereby protect our liberal democratic values.
What about the argument, just to play devil's advocate before we run out of time, what about the argument that, unlike Switzerland, we're a nation that is highly dependent on a very high immigration intake year on year? A lot of people don't realise how many hundreds of thousands of skilled migrants we bring in to generate growth and all the rest of it. Are you risking that if you increase the bar on citizenship?
I don't think so. I think they want to come here because it's a safe, economically attractive country.
And so you'd find other people, even if some people took a double
I don't think it would have the slightest bit of effect on our immigration rates. You're quite right, though. We do need immigrants. We've always needed immigrants. I'm very much in favour of maintaining substantial immigration. We have to reassure the public, though, that we have our immigration policy under control and it's not undermining our values. I think the citizenship idea would actually reinforce public support for maintaining substantial levels of immigration, because it would reassure them we are not letting go of our fundamental values.
David Leyonhjelm, always appreciate talking to you. Thanks for joining me today. Cheers.
My pleasure.